awaiting the next for a summit. And time will begin on my first word. Summit High School negates. The United States has substantially reduced its military support of Taiwan. Our first contention is alliances. Currently, Asian alliances are strong. Bradley 24 states that commitments remain credible. The U.S. and allies remain committed to extended nuclear deterrence. The U.S.-Taiwan alliance specifically is key. SACS 23 continues that Taiwan is a critical node anchoring a network of U.S. allies. Its location dictates the balance of power in the region. With the U.S. throughout the island, China's military will struggle to project power. The abandonment of Taiwan would ruin U.S. power and alliances. Erickson 24 finds that failing to support Taiwan would create a crisis of confidence among allies in Asia. Takeover of Taiwan would prompt serious global questioning of U.S. commitments to the security of allies and the defense of democracy. Taiwan would build nukes without the United States, but the U.S. stops them because they are an empire. Schwartz 21 finds that without U.S. military protection, Taiwan would build nuclear weapons, something it has the wealth and technology to do quickly and has explored in the past. If Taiwan wanders off on its own, South Korea and Japan will get anxious and do so next. Littlefield 20 writes that weak security guarantees from the United States, coupled with escalating aggression from China, may soon present Biden with a Taiwan that believes its only option for survival is to restart a covert nuclear weapons program. The Biden administration has time to devise a policy that ensures Taiwan's security while discouraging the pursuit of nuclear weapons. However, half measures, ambiguity, or doing nothing is no longer an option. Taiwan will protect its freedom with or without America's help. The impact is conventional war. Siki 21 finds that if Taiwan tries to proliferate, China will take action. That would make an all-out war across the Taiwan Straits almost inevitable. Gilbert 22 quantifies that the conflict could result in 500,000 deaths on both sides. If more countries proliferate, there's a heightened risk of nuclear war. Wisner 18 writes, if less than 1% of nuclear weapons in the world were to explode, tons of debris would enter the stratosphere, lower the Earth's temperature, and destroy the stability of the ozone layer. A nuclear exchange could end civilization everywhere. Our second contention is blockades. Maisland 24 states that Beijing asserts that there is only one China and Taiwan is a part of it. The One China principle seeks Taiwan's eventual unification with the mainland. Voting Aft creates a window that China will take advantage of. China is opportunistic and statistics prove this. Weiss 24 writes that China's behavior in the South China Sea could be accurately described as unprovoked aggression. Only 12% of China's coercive acts were preceded by any hostile move. The remaining 88% were employed against vulnerable targets. Critical to this is America's power to arm Taiwan with defense capabilities to convince leaders Beijing is better off not trying. Without U.S. support, a blockade would be the first step. According to Stroud 23, a blockade is most likely due to Taiwan's reliance on maritime trade. A blockade is appealing to the PRC. CSIS 24 finds that a blockade would be the next rung up the escalation ladder. A blockade would aim to cripple Taiwan by cutting off trade and other materials needed to sustain Taiwan's bustling economy. However, if Taiwan proves resilient and if it receives assistance from the U.S., China may find it impossible to force Taiwan's capitulation. Our argument happens as soon as you affirm. China has already shown signs of readiness. CBS 24 writes, China employed its aircraft carrier and ships in large-scale simulating the sealing off of ports. The impact is recession. Zapata 23 quantifies that a Chinese blockade of Taiwan would result in a staggering estimated loss of $2.7 trillion and a 2.8% decline in global economic outputs, almost double the 2008 financial crisis. This would plunge millions into poverty. IMF 13 writes, 900 million people are vulnerable to being pushed into poverty in the face of adverse shocks. Thus, we negate.
Okay. I'm Riley Roth speaking first for the act. Is everyone ready? Okay. My time will begin now. Trevor and I affirm resolve. The United States federal government should substantially reduce its military support of Taiwan. Our first argument is North Korea. The peninsula is heating up. North Korea's recent tests are more dangerous than ever. UN-24 found that this latest test marked the 11th interconnection ballistic missile ICBM launch by North Korea since 2021. The most recent ICBM landed only 200 kilometers from Japanese islands and brought the greatest threat yet. China is crucial to talks with North Korea, but military support alienates them. Jahil 19 finds that China is a key player in getting North Korea to halt its missile programs. Conducting talks emphasizes that war is not an option. China protested arms sales to Taiwan, exercised anger China, and heightened China's threat perception. Larson 23 continues that as the United States intensified efforts, it risks damaging its relationship with China and hamstring its ability to advance interests. Every incident causes relations to deteriorate. UN French 24 explained that the intensifying U.S.-China rivalry will pose a hurdle to cooperation towards Korean denuclearization. China may suspend cooperation until the partner grants concessions. In 2022, China suspended cooperative initiatives to punish the United States for Pelosi's visit to Taiwan. Calmer 17 concludes that risks posed by North Korean missiles, if there's an economic way to put pressure on North Korea, it has to come from China. Unless a resolution can be reached, Su 23 finds that flight testing ICBMs increase the chance of conflict when countries are affected by the falling debris. If the status quo continues, Frel 17 warns that the United States would have to launch a counterattack that plunges the world into an all-out war. China would wage into the conflict to defend North Korea. Most wars happen by accident. Goldenstein 19 concludes that it purports to map the impact of a Chinese ICBM strike would yield 50 million deaths. Our second argument is Ukraine. Tobin 24 reports in October that a Russian offensive to Kyiv earlier in the summer appeared to largely fail because of Ukrainian resistance. In August, Ukrainian forces crossed into the Kursk region of Russia for a potentially embarging trip. Heresy 24 finds that with assistance from the United States, Ukraine can hold out and continue to do damage. However, without assistance, Ukraine will lose by the end of 2024. Pocassi 24 explains that in a world of finite resources, policymakers will have to make tough choices about Ukraine and Taiwan. The kinds of weapons that the United States provides to Ukraine and Taiwan overlap. Missiles are becoming increasingly limited. Unfortunately, without weapons, Ukraine would lose, and the war would span to all over Europe. Shonlin 22 explains that Cameron could demand for surrender and NATO and the Baltic states would get inside the conflict. Either Moscow or Washington would miscalculate, and the risk of accidental inversion or escalated war increased exponentially. Our third argument is gray zone escalation. China isn't the boogeyman. Berkeley and Brands 21 write that numerous scholars analyze when and why Beijing uses force. It attacks not when enemies are closing in, but attacks one enemy to scare off the other, which is why Khan 24 found that a new normal meant mutual suspicion. Beijing and Washington have become desensitized to risk and are one incident away from a war. Swain 23 continues that rather than preventing a war over Taiwan, a policy centered on military deterrence could spark one. The United States deterrence policy is incompatible with China. The PRC's legitimacy in the eyes of its citizens would not survive if Beijing failed to respond, even in small gray zone responses. Zhao 20 finds if there's a maritime clash, the United States can have an excuse to step in and trigger a direct military conflict between China and the United States. China can send its response to gray zone operations. This conflict is detrimental. Goldberg 23 finds that China will use force, and the conflict will result in 500,000 deaths on both sides. Thus we urge an act out.
Okay, are you doing your talks?
You can take first question.
Alright, let's start right now. Okay, could we agree that just in general, China wants to reunify with Taiwan?
Our evidence finds that it's actually not true. Due to different issues, domestic issues, Xi Jinping in recent years has been more focused on things like improving his economy. Right now, they're in a recession, which is why that he's going to want to focus on things like domestic problems that are actually affecting his people, and it's what the nationalists inside of China want.
Okay, but in general, do you agree that China does, because of there's history in their one China principle, that just in general, they do want to?
Even if they want to, they understand that it can never happen. Taiwan and China, their economies are so interlinked to the point where any invasion scenario would crumple China's economy. Because it would destroy their own economy, they're never going to risk a conflict, which is why if you look during the Obama administration, we saw that in 2014, we decreased aid to Taiwan. And during that time period, we never saw the invasion scenario you talked about.
Okay, you can take the question.
Yeah. Let's go to your argument about blockade, right?
Sure.
So if the blockade scenario would harm China, why would they ever do it?
Okay, yeah. So we actually have a lot of responses, and we'll go more into detail during rebuttal, summary, whatever. First of all, China and the U.S., Taiwan, all these other countries have so many restrictions on China. They're basically trying to make China fail, trying to create this resistance. So China has been relying less on these countries and focusing more on domestic production. And also, specifically, the reason why our argument focuses on blockade. First of all, we already see China right now simulating full-scale blockades of Taiwan's ports. It's clearly something they're interested in doing. And second of all, we also see that China, in the case of a blockade, is really uniquely good for China's economy because they could embargo Taiwan and force them to trade, which is overall good for their economy.
They depend on Taiwan for semiconductors. Sure, China has been trying to get away from other countries. The one aspect that China hasn't been able to get away from is their semiconductor industries. And because semiconductors are so important to their military, they're never going to risk a blockade scenario. The only
really
risk of a blockade or an invasion scenario only happens when you have the United States on their doorstep that is putting Xi Jinping's legitimacy at risk and is forcing them to react.
The Chinese semiconductor industry is getting a lot better, but could I take a question about your contention 3?
Yeah.
On escalation. Okay, so you say that the U.S. is going to need to respond to gray zone warfare by force, but why haven't we already seen this happen? Like, what's the...
Yeah, so right now we are seeing tensions at an all-time high in the region. That's for 2 reasons. The first is the United States shifted away from its old strategic ambiguity approach. Beforehand, we never offered full support of Taiwan, but now Biden has spoken out saying we're going to offer full support in a conflict. And the second reason is we've been giving them so much more money than any other time in history, and that's putting Xi's legitimacy at risk, and this is the reason why a risk of a conflict or any escalatory scenario is right now. It's forcing him to act, it's forcing him to become aggressive.
Okay, that's cross, but can you send the evidence saying that Biden said that he's going to like fully protect?
Yeah.
Doesn't that make sense? And then we'll start.
Yeah. I'm about to send it. Let me just open up. It's in our last report. So. Okay, I just sent it. It's probably going to stay the same.
Okay. Okay, yeah, I just got it. Okay, we're going to take running for starting running. Okay, that's nice.
I'm the second speaker for Summit on Econ, and before I start my time, I'm just going to give a quick off-time roadmap. I will just be going down my opponent's case. I'm going to start on my first word. Deterrence has been working for the last 70 years. My opponents failed to provide a unique piece of evidence that counters otherwise. Look to the history and the one China policy that China has always wanted to reunify, and the act gives them the opportunity to do so. Look to our WISE 24 evidence that states 88% of the time China attacks the burn level. First, on North Korea. This entire argument relies on relations between the US and China being good, but that will never happen. First, other disagreements cause decline in relations, and Taiwan is not key. Easily 16 states that points of friction in U.S.-China relations abound from cyber espionage and human rights to trade disputes and financial governance. Abandoning Taiwan will not stop Chinese moderation. But then second, China views affirming as appeasement. Chapter 11 states a decision to cut back significant U.S. support would prove to an increasingly confident China that Washington has become weak. Analysts who argue that Washington can appease Beijing assume improbably modest Chinese objectives. The issue isn't just about Taiwan, it's about China's growing power and its willingness to challenge international norms. But then, look to our Delbarton 11 finds that the Obama administration basically abandoned its commitment to Taiwan under the TRA, and China reacted to these concessions by pressing territorial claims, intimidating allies, and rejecting calls for better military relations with the U.S. and Sino-U.S. relations have rarely been worse, meaning we are never going to see cooperation on any issues, and we've never seen that in the past. But then, third, Trump's tariffs ruin possible cooperation. Belcher 24 finds that Trump imposed tariffs, sparking a trade war in his last presidency. Additionally, Trump's administration is filled with China hawks who are actively trying to provoke China, meaning with his new administration, we are never going to be on good terms. This means we are never going to see talks with North Korea. On Ukraine. First, Taiwan and Ukraine use different channels for arms sales. Covenant 23 finds that Taiwan and Ukraine have received arms through two different channels. Most of the aid that Ukraine has received has come from the U.S. stockpiles through presidential drawdown authority rather than foreign military sales on which Taiwan has traditionally relied. But then second, Ukraine and Taiwan get very different kinds of weapons. Covenant 23 furthers that Ukraine and Taiwan face vastly different battlefield demands that limit the extent of any overlap. Ukraine needs short-range artillery and air defense, and Taiwan needs longer-range missiles and air defense and anti-ship capabilities. These two, moving on, Trump is going to be in office, and also Trump thumps. First, Prince 24 finds that Trump has asserted repeatedly that if he is elected, he will end the war quickly, so there is no need to affirm. But then second, Elliot 24 finds that Trump has threatened to cut Ukraine funding quickly if elected. Now that he will take office soon, the affirmative cannot solve for him slashing funding, meaning they are not solving in any world. But then third, on their gray zone escalation argument. They tell you that China is extremely mad now because Biden claimed we will support Taiwan. Keep in mind that one, this was a blanket statement, and two, and there are no official agreements or documents to back this claim up, and two, a completely new administration is coming into office. First, let's look to their Beckley 21 evidence. First, they read this card from 2021 that says that China is reactive and only strikes if provoked. If you read the next line on the card, it contradicts itself, stating the Chinese Communist Party wages war when it perceives an opportunity of vulnerability. Their evidence directly proves our point, perceiving a window of opportunity. But then second, Taiwanese conflict is not inevitable, and current defense alliance and the bridges between presidents creates diplomacy. U-24 states that nothing's inevitable. The U.S. and China have had a difference of views, and it hasn't resulted in war. Leadership in Beijing never believed they have a viable military option and an acceptable cost. On gray zones, increased gray zone infraction proves that deterrence works. Takashi 19 states the reason why the challengers use gray zone to change the status quo is that first, they disconnect with the status quo, and second, they recognize the inferiority in conventional military challenge. This means deterrence is working, and ask yourself the question of why is the U.S. there in the first place, thus negate.
Can you send different channels of weapons on Ukraine?
Yeah.
And then, like, it's a blank statement, no official.
Well, that was just like, that was an analytic.
Okay.
I'm like reading that.
The two different channels of weapons.
Yeah.
It should be sent.
And then, can you do, what part of the Brecklin grants are you talking about? With, can you,
Is that
Just
our
like-
Beckley evidence?
Yeah, look at your Beckley evidence, just look like one or two lines down. You won't see it.
If you want, we can send them.
Yeah, we could like send it re-highlighted, or you can just
Sure. Or if you can like point it out.
oh, yeah, okay, I found it.
You see? Okay.
Yeah, okay. Actually, wait, can you give me a sec? I just haven't received it. Okay. I just got it. Our time will start. take like 10 more seconds. Sorry, more sure. You can see. Okay, that's 12 seconds. So it's going to start with a quick overview, and then I'll be going on our case, and then I'll be getting to the case. The issue with their case is that it misses history. The Obama administration successfully reduced military aid, leading to a 2-month pause in China's gray zone attacks and invasion plans. Meanwhile, no nuclear proliferation or blockades occurred. However, when aid resumed, China became aggressive again. They try to read this overview about how they've been doing the same thing for 70 years. What they miss is our con evidence, which is really key, which finds that the tensions are at an all-time high right now. China is increasing its escalation right now. They've started launching ICBMs at Taiwan, and they started sending fighter jets into Taiwanese airspace. It's uniquely bad right now. Go to our second contention about Ukraine. First, they read 2 responses on how Ukraine and Taiwan go through different channels and that they require different weapons. Both of their pieces of evidence are from last year. Our evidence from this year finds that the war has changed. Now they're utilizing the same type of weapons. There's drastic overlap, and they're going through the same channels. Our evidence vastly postdates them. Then they say that Trump is just going to end the war and that there's going to be a new administration. But our argument is that even if Trump is going to end the war, we need to hold out until Trump gets elected. But we're saying that no, we won't be able to do that in the status quo as our evidence finds. However, in the pro world, there will be enough funding to actually accomplish that. Go to our contention 3 about escalation. First, they just say that Biden made a blanket statement when he ended strategic ambiguity, and also that there's going to be a new administration. But for one thing, Biden literally said he would support Taiwan no matter what. And under Trump's first administration, aid to Taiwan only increased. They give no reason why it would be different in the second administration. Then they try to indict our Beckley evidence, What our Beckley evidence says, the issue with their indict is that China doesn't want Taiwan. Our Beckley evidence says that if China wanted Taiwan, then they might go for the invasion. However, what they have conceded in their speech is that China doesn't want Taiwan. In Obama, empirically, when we reduced aid, there was no invasion. China doesn't want Taiwan. Then they say that conflict isn't inevitable, but they miss our uniquest evidence, which finds that tensions are uniquely high right now. They've been launching ICBMs. Then they say deterrence works for gray zone, but no, again, we've seen more and more escalation. We're launching missiles. Go to their arguments. First, on alliances. There's 2 major issues here. One, our alliances are weak in the status quo, as Su-24 finds that our allies across Asia are disengaging from the U.S., which is why Herndon-24 finds that historically, when U.S. commitments around Taiwan wavered, our alliances broadly improved for 2 reasons. One is that if the U.S. pulled commitments, they're historically attached with measures to pivot our commitments to other allies. Allies feel that we can now start spending more money on them if we're spending less money on Taiwan, so they want us to pull out. And second, allies want us to cut support for Taiwan because they feel like if we don't, then they're going to get wrapped up in a conflict between Taiwan and China. On their argument about nuclear proliferation specifically, this wouldn't happen for 2 reasons. The number one is that there's no domestic uranium. Taiwan and other allies don't have the domestic uranium in order to proliferate because the United States is so against proliferation, they'll never give these countries the resources. And the second reason why allies won't proliferate is from Einhorn, who is a scholar in international nuclear proliferation, found that for one, the people and the government of these countries are so anti-nuclear because they understand it's escalatory, like they claim, and second, because they don't have the capabilities or the facilities to do this because they've been shut down. Go to their second contention about blockades. There's a few issues here. China doesn't want to do a blockade. First of all, because it shoots themselves in the foot. Cutting trade ruins them. China's economy is reliant on exports. This destroys Xi's foreign policies, and countries would shift more to going with the U.S. instead of China. Xi and the nationalists high up in the Chinese government want Chinese hegemony and not American, and they feel like if there's a blockade, they would lose their American hegemony. They would lose their Chinese hegemony. And second is that Xi's inner circle and public would turn on him, and impoverished China with no trade would cause his public to turn on him. Lastly, they bring up this Weiss evidence that says that 88% of the time, Chinese war comes from when America is weak. There's 2 issues here. One, their evidence is talking about Xi taking over literal uninhabited Philippine islands. Taiwan would be a completely different scenario. Their evidence doesn't apply. And second, their article cites Michael Buckley, who is a historical alarmist who claims China is going to invade since the 1980s, but they never have. The scholar that they cite is just an alarmist. He's clearly not correct. The history proved is an easy make on it.
Wait, actually, really fast, before that, could you send the evidence saying that Ukraine and Taiwan use the same, channels for weapons,
Yeah.
and they need the same weapons?
You got that?
Okay. You got some questions?
it got better when we like reduced aid. But like if that was true, then why did we resume aid?
Our argument is that the reason he resumed aid is because of political purposes, right? This was when Obama started reinstating aid. That was right near his re-election. It was in 2011. It was right before the presidential election when Obama was vying for a second term. So the reason he reinstated aid is because he felt that his Democratic voter base wanted there to be more aid to Taiwan, so he wanted to do that for re-election.
Okay, so let's go to your response on Biden. You said Biden ending strategic ambiguity was somehow a blanket statement. How is it a blanket statement? What do you mean by that?
Okay, so what we're saying is still, even after he got rid of strategic ambiguity, we still saw the fact that deterrence is still there, right? Deterrence has been working for the last 7 years, one. And two, we still see the fact that like we are still providing aid to Taiwan. We still send packages. So that's
Can I ask a follow-up?
Sure.
If deterrence is working, why has China been launching ICBMs into Taiwanese waters
Are those
like this year?
Okay, are those like simulated drills?
They're literally launching ICBMs.
Okay, yeah, so what we would say to that is that so China basically, what they're waiting for is they're anticipating a U.S. pullout, right? What's happening right now is that the U.S. is not sending as much significant aid to Taiwan, but what they're waiting for is a U.S. pullout. We already tell you in our case that we've been seeing these drills, and they've been like running a lot of like these really harmful drills, but then again, we still haven't seen them do anything, and that's because the U.S. is there, right? These missiles aren't actually really directly doing
Wait, why would they be waiting for the U.S. pullout if the U.S. has only been increasing its support to Taiwan, and they literally ended their policy of strategic ambiguity 2 years ago?
Okay,
Why would they feel that the US
how are they
pull out?
ending? Okay, how are they
Biden
ending
said he was
their?
going to support Taiwan no matter what, literally 2 years ago. That was a policy that hasn't been there for the past 70 years, but he recently changed it. He's increasing his support towards Taiwan.
Okay, that's just a statement he made, though, right? Like that's
Yeah,
we don't know for a fact that he actually decreased.
The president of the United States said he was going to support Taiwan at all costs, and that's just
We're
like
just
not
going
making-
on stuff.
Okay,
Can
so
we
you can
go?
have-
Okay, yeah. So my question is, you talk about how like our blockades harm China, and like you read something on how like it will ruin Xi's reputation. Can you just elaborate on that?
We're talking about number one, we're talking about the international reputation. China really wants to establish its hegemony and its world power, and they want to be more powerful than the United States, right? But they feel that if they start blockading Taiwan, that's going to ruin their international power.
Taiwan. They could have just traded with Taiwan directly, right? Taiwan, you state themselves exports these semiconductors and all of that, but then wouldn't you say that if they were to blockade Taiwan, then
Isn't your whole argument that they would cut trade with Taiwan?
that's not our whole argument. That's our argument is that China's blockade. That's cross, but I'm just gonna finish that statement.
Sure.
So our whole argument is that China's going to blockade Taiwan, and that would be actually uniquely good for their economy, because then China would be able to embargo Taiwan. Taiwan does not want to reunify with China, and they would actually just be forced to trade with China in order to not get that.
We're gonna take running prep, starting right in.
That's all your cup, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. The order of the speech is just going to be our case, then we're going to address Clash, and then go on to their case. My time will begin on my first word. Disregard our first contention because the place to vote in this round is on our contention to a blockade. Because we tell you that China desperately wants to reunify with Taiwan, and the one thing stopping them is the United States. Without U.S. support, China would take the first steps to reunification by blockading Taiwan. And a blockade is most likely because Taiwan relies on maritime trade for resources and economic activity. And China is ready to blockade as soon as the resolution is passed because they simulated a full-scale invasion of Taiwan, blockade of Taiwan's ports. The impact here is economic crisis. We will see $2.7 trillion lost from global output and also 900 million people sentenced to poverty. They make a couple of responses here. First of all, they tell you that's bad for China's economy, but we tell you that Taiwan and the U.S. have already imposed such great restrictions on Taiwan in the form of sanctions and other things, so there's no incentive for China to keep a good economic relationship with either of these countries. And we also tell you that this is actually uniquely good for China's economy, because in the case of a blockade, China would be able to embargo Taiwan and force them to trade with them. So this would be overall good for their economy. And we also tell you that China's semiconductor industry is promising, and they're reducing their need for semiconductors from Taiwan anyways. But let's look to the clash in the round. First of all, you should be voting with the statistics because our WISE evidence from 2024 states that basically China has attacked vulnerable territories 88% of the time. And it doesn't matter if it was in the Philippines because the point is that China takes advantage of places that can't defend themselves. And they try to indict their evidence, but their Arthur Beckley is literally a writer on that source. But on their Beckley evidence, either way, our evidence is more recent than theirs. Theirs is from 2021. And ours also takes into account real-world scenarios rather than just some professor stating that China has some calculus. We tell you that 88% of the time, this is what we've seen in real life. They also tell you that China doesn't want to invade Taiwan. That's just simply not true. They can see the one China principle because China will always want to invade. We saw full-scale blockade simulations. There's clear intention here. Don't let them try to convince you otherwise. But let's look to their case. On North Korea, we tell you U.S. relations won't get any better because Trump is adding tariffs, and also look to Obama where we reduced aid and saw China get more aggressive. This is not because of the political reason, as China literally got more aggressive. And you just ask yourself the question, if we saw relations getting better, why did we resume aid? The reason why is because we saw unprovoked aggression and we saw territorial claims being pushed. But then second, look to the, let's go into Ukraine. So their evidence is really vague and it's just about funding in general, but we tell you, based on the territory, based on the fact that Taiwan is an island and Ukraine is a landlocked country, right? They need two different kinds of missiles, and their evidence doesn't actually contradict that otherwise, but ours is a lot more specific. And then on gray zones, once again, there's no uniqueness here because we've seen the drills for years. There's no actual real threat. And drills and gray zone tactics are just proof that deterrence is working because China is unwilling to start a real war. They also concede the fact that Biden never made real agreements to the fact that he will defend Taiwan, and there's no reason to think that Trump and his new administration are going to back this up. And we also already told you that China and the U.S. have held talks 2 months ago talking about miscalculation. So vote for them.
Okay. So you are arguments compared with their arguments. Okay. My time will begin now. The Obama administration successfully reduced aid to Taiwan, and during that time period, we saw a 2-month pause in China's gray zone operation. Tensions run an all-time low. They make two responses. The first argument they bring up is that it increased aggression. The aggression we saw during that time was in other areas like the Philippines. We never saw in 2 months time period any issues regarding Taiwan. The second argument they bring up is why resume aid. The people inside the government, like the own argument they bring up, care about us providing aid to Taiwan. It was all political. It was not due to other actions. The argument we're focusing on is escalation. U.S. assistance to Taiwan increased tensions. China's legitimacy is put in question, forcing them to act. China's economy is doing poor, and nationalist pressures are forcing their hand. These raise an escalation when China gets more aggressive, spiral to an all-out conflict, killing 500,000. There we have two arguments. The first is that we've seen drills for years without any conflict. What they miss inside of Trevor's speech is that tensions right now are uniquely different due to the economy and nationalist pressures. Plus, with the increased amount of aid that's being provided to Taiwan, all of this point to our con evidence, which finds that China is being forced to react right now. The second argument they bring up is revolving on Breckley and Brandt's evidence. They say that the one China proposal, but no, our evidence finds that recently China has gone against that and would rather focus on domestic issues like the economy, because this is what the nationalists and public people all want. Go to the reason we win this debate and why you prefer our argument over theirs. The first is that our argument is uniquely more likely. The uncontested fact of this entire speech is that tensions right now are at an all-time high, meaning the chance of a conflict is very high and it is going to happen. In comparison, we saw the Obama administration cut aid. It didn't lead to a blockade scenario they talk about. Let's go to their arguments. The first argument you're extending revolves around the Weiss evidence. Remember that Weiss is talking about uninhabited islands in the middle of nowhere that China took over, and he's a complete alarmist that has been saying an invasion's happening since 1980. They say that it doesn't matter if he's talking about some random islands, but yes, it does. They're never going to take action against another country. They only go against very, very weak opponents like unmanned islands that have no actual significance. The second argument you're going to go is that it ruins them. They rely on exports to other countries like Taiwan. They make the argument that they will force them to increase trade, but Taiwan is never going to trade with a country that's completely blockading them. They'll just try to get around it to other actions. And secondly, our evidence finds that this blockade scenario destroys Taiwan's economy. And insofar as Taiwan's struggling, they're never going to actually be able to trade with them in the first place, which is why if you look at history, we've never seen a blockade scenario. All the internal people inside of China's government understand that a blockade would destroy their own economy, which is why in the last 20 years we have never seen it, even when we decrease support. Their arguments haven't happened throughout history. The only thing we've seen is high tensions right now. Good, Ren.
Yeah. Okay. Let's start time now. Let's talk about Obama a little bit. So can you just give a couple examples of these like political reasons why people would want aid to resume? If there was like no conflict at all, why was there people that were like, hey, let's just resume aid to Taiwan?
So you have a lot of war hawks inside of Congress or like inside the Democratic Party or like any of the parties.
Like Obama's presidency specifically.
Yeah. These people don't like China. And because they don't like China, it was politically unpopular for him to provide aid. It was politically popular for him to provide aid to Taiwan. And these people didn't like Obama going against what they said, which is why he increased aid. He never increased aid because of increased aggression. Because if you actually look at history, we never saw any attacks against Taiwan.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so then how did we even see a bill get through to cut aid in the first place if all of like the Senate and all these people didn't want like funding going, or they didn't want funding? How did we even get a bill through saying that we're going to cut aid if everyone was pushing to cut aid?
The reason it got through was during that time period, we saw that Obama had the ability to do so, or at that point, because it was early on in his presidency. And because it was early on in his presidency, other people like the Senate and Congress were fine passing it. But the people that actually vote for him didn't like it. And because the people don't like that he wasn't providing aid to Taiwan, that's why he did it when the election came up later on. Right before the election, that's the only time when we saw Obama actually provide aid, which shows that it was actually the public pressure that caused him to do so. It didn't matter to any actions.
My question is like, why is the public pushing for aid to Taiwan?
Because they want us to support Taiwan.
But why? If the
issue
relations
is
were as high as they've ever been and there was no problems at all, why was the public pushing so hard?
Because they wanted us to support Taiwan.
But
You've not provided any evidence that Taiwan or China got aggressive. Let me finish, please. They never got aggressive against Taiwan. The only region that they got aggressive against was the Philippines. We saw none of their scenarios. In the 3-month period, we cut funding. If a blockade, per their own evidence, can happen so quickly, we should have saw it. I'll take a question, then we spent 2 minutes on this. Okay. Right. So let's go to the Brackley and Brand's evidence, right?
Sure.
So if China's economy is struggling right now, why wouldn't Xi Jinping rather focus on solving for issues like that instead of doing a complete invasion?
Because what we tell you is that a blockade of Taiwan is uniquely good for China's economy. Specifically because if they're able to embargo Taiwan,
How is embargoing Taiwan good for it?
Because if they can force Taiwan to trade with them, then that's good for their
They're
economy.
already trading right now.
Yeah, but completely have control over Taiwan's trading abilities.
But if Taiwan couldn't trade outside of China, that would hurt the Taiwanese economy, and subsequently they would have less to be able to trade with China in the first place.
Yeah, but what we're saying is for the blockade, what they're trying to do is the reason the blockade is one, they would gain a lot of benefits for their economy, but then two, Taiwan would eventually have to give in. That's why it makes a blockade really likely and good for their economy. Quick off-time roadmap is going to be our case, comparing the two cases of their case. I'm going to start on my first word. The most important argument in this round is our C2 on blockade. China desperately wants to reunify with Taiwan. The only thing stopping them is the United States. Without U.S. support, China would take the first step to reunification by blockading Taiwan. A blockade is most likely as Taiwan relies on maritime trade for resources and the economy. China is ready to blockade as soon as the resolution is passed. They have simulated a full-scale blockade on Taiwan's ports specifically. But then look at the impact. There's going to be an economic crisis, and $2.7 trillion would be lost. GDP would go down, and 900 million people are on the verge of being pushed into poverty. Look to the time frame. First, the impact will happen immediately as China is ready. We tell you that they have been simulating blockades, so this means this also increases the probability of our impact happening. But let's look to their responses. First, they say that it's bad for China's economy, and we make 3 responses to this. First, China has nothing to lose because there are already restrictions from Taiwan and U.S. and from the Taiwan and U.S. and other countries, meaning they have nothing to lose. But then second, it would actually be good for their economy because they would be able to embargo Taiwan and force Taiwan to trade with them in case of a blockade. Taiwan does not want to give in to China, meaning they would be forced to trade with them. But then we also tell you that China's semiconductor industry is promising, and they make no responses to this. We are winning here, but let's look to the past. First on Obama, we already tell you that China got more aggressive, which is the logical reason as to why we resumed aid. Obama passed this bill in order to cut funding in the first place to reduce tensions, but that backfired. But then either way, look to our Y24 evidence that states that statistically China has attacked vulnerable territories 88% of the time. It doesn't matter if they were in the Philippines. The point is that China takes advantage of vulnerable territories. Taiwan is weak without the United States. Everybody knows that. But they also tell you that China does not want to invade. This is not true. They concede the one China principle, which would state that we will always want to blockade. We saw full-scale drills on their case. On gray zones, there's no uniqueness. We've seen drills, there's no real threat. Drills and gray zone tactics are just proof of deterrence is working. There's been no actual war. They also can see that Biden didn't make any real agreements in the end, the new administration. We also told you that China and U.S. held talks just 2 months ago to prevent miscalculation, thus negated.
Okay, we'll take the minute prep we have left. Okay. Time will begin.
speaking second for Delbarton. My speakers will speak a quick overview of our arguments, their arguments, and a comparative between the two arguments, between the two sides. The Obama administration successfully reduced military aid, leading to a 2-month pause in China's gray zone and invasion plans. Meanwhile, no nuclear proliferation or blockades occurred. They completely conceded that. When aid resumes, China became more aggressive again. Again, that's been conceded. They just extend one response claiming that China was more aggressive during the period when Obama reduced aid. They provide literally no evidence for this, and they also concede our analysis that Obama only reinstated aid because of political pressures. This was right before his re-election. He wanted to reinstate aid. We know history is on our side. Remember, right now tensions are at an all-time high due to American support. China is literally launching ICBMs at Taiwan. They're increasing these gray zone escalations. Absent Chinese aid, these gray zone escalations would go away and there would not be a conflict. If there was a conflict, it would lead to 500,000 deaths and a drastic recession. They just extend two responses. Number one, they say that there's no uniqueness and there's not any threat right now. What they've literally conceded is that China is literally launching ICBMs at Taiwan right now. Tensions are uniquely high right now because Biden ending strategic ambiguity. They say that Biden hasn't actually ended strategic ambiguity. They say he hasn't provided any formalized agreement. But no, the President of the United States saying he would literally support Taiwan by any means necessary and for all costs, I think is a pretty good agreement. Then, let's go on to their arguments. First, let's go into their arguments about blockade. First of all, they say they would blockade because it would help the Chinese economy. But no, they conceded our empiric, which finds that a blockade would hurt the Chinese economy by 8%. The people don't want it. And also, the blockade would hurt the Taiwanese economy, so they wouldn't be able to trade with China as much. In addition, they keep bringing up this Weiss evidence, but the issue with their Weiss evidence is it's talking about random uninhabited Philippines islands. That's completely different from Taiwan. And it's also setting a historical alarmness. They say they're staying with the one China policy, but they've conceded what we said on how we're moving away from the one China policy right now. The reason you prefer our argument first is that the only chance of solvency. What's gone uncontested is that tensions are at an all-time high. ICBMs have been launched into Taiwanese airspace. We need to change. In comparison, during the Obama administration, we never saw any of their impacts. All of this got conceded. You need to prioritize our argument before theirs.
Bigger round.